liveda.com. Please share the live, like our pages, get the latest breaking news and reviews as it happens, when it happens, only on Q95, the big station. Yes, we do love our little nature island, Dominica. And tonight we're continuing to move to revive the spirit of graciousness, of love and peace and prosperity and unity among our Kalinago and Afro Caribbean brothers and sisters with this special edition of the Global View on Q. My very distinguished guests tonight are Justice Dr. Irving Andre, economist and UWP leader Dr. Thomson Fontaine, computer science engineer, knowledge industries expert, and DFP leader Bernard Ito, educationist and sociologist, and one of the most popular people that I know of in Dominica, Simeon Joseph, is also with us tonight. Here are a few talking points that we would like our guests to consider, given their comments on tonight. Our discussions will focus on the implications, the legality, and morality of what many describe as a sham snap general election, the constitutional issues that overshadow the snap general election, the evaluation of the results as they have been coming in from the various polling districts. We get a sense now that the voter turnout has been extremely low, unusually low, and significantly low. The circumstances surrounding Sir Dennis Byron's engagement and his preliminary report, which has been released and apparently ignored so far, the role, functions, and politics of the election observers that are now on island to observe this electoral process in Dominica, the politics of Caribbean leaders in these circumstances, the neutering of the CCJ. We know the story. I'm sure Dr. Irving Andre will speak to us about some of that. We will also comment on the derogatory and seemingly threatening voter intimidation comments allegedly made by DLP handlers on their campaign platforms and much more. And certainly we'll want to look at the role of patriots going forward post this snap general election. What will be different tomorrow, Wednesday morning, 7th of December, one day after this highly controversial snap general election? What is the way forward for Dominica's economy now? Its democracy, its human rights, and its civil liberties? What is the future of free and fair elections in Dominica? How soon will that be seen? Are Dominicans ready and resolved to truly unite and fight to preserve their democracy and free and fair elections within a framework of modern electoral laws and campaign finance laws and regulations? Would we have known a little bit more about $23 million spent on a campaign where leaders still had to beg people today to go out to vote because they seem to have been reluctant and not inclined to go out to vote, and still get such a low voter turnout without, in fact, any opposition parties contesting? Are all these values under threat from the snap general election intended to avoid electoral reform recommendations paid for with some $650,000 of the people's money? Really, is that $650,000 now just being thrown away, like monies that have been thrown away in the past on electoral reform recommendations? As we prepare to embrace Dominica's 45th anniversary of independence in 2023, are Dominicans unifying at home and globally to preserve around the preservation of their democracy and their human rights and their civil liberties and their free and fair elections? My distinguished guest, Justice Dr. Irving Andre, economist and UW leader Dr. Thomson Fontaine, computer science engineer, knowledge industries expert, and DFP leader Bernard Ito, educationist and sociologist Simeon Joseph will all help us unravel the answers to these burning questions. We will discuss the good, the bad, the ugly, and the dangerous. No anger, no malice, no personal attacks, no vilification, no divisiveness. Let all ideas contend tonight. I know you will call us and you will express to us your own views on what has transpired today. I'm not even sure how to describe this election day, but maybe you will for us later on. Tonight, we're just bringing back civility, a caring society, and progressive economic and cultural practices, and recognizing the imperative for the true resilience and sustainability of our Kalinago and Afro-Caribbean brothers and sisters. So wherever you are, call in, tell us how we can all get together, take a stand, and make a fresh start before the dawn of our 45th anniversary of independence in 2023, and to build a modern society and economy in Dominica with work, good wages, and wealth for every Dominican as our main goal. So let's put Dominicans first again. Stay with us in this space for another great debate. Get the answers to your questions. Be part of the solution. Wherever you are in Dominica, in the region, and globally, your voice is at home and abroad. Take priority tonight. Call in. Join the conversation. Tell us how we can make this fresh start in embracing the 45th anniversary of our independence on the Global View and Q. And have your say as you do every Tuesday with me, Mr. G, only on Q95, the big station. But as usual, as we get going, a huge shout out, hugs, much love, appreciation, and a big thank you to our healthcare providers and frontline workers. We see you doing your best and often working under very difficult conditions. So I say to all, please follow the correct advice, the guidelines and protocols. Be safe. So happy to have you with us tonight again. We welcome you warmly and embrace you wherever you are, in every nook and cranny, in every village and every community in Dominica, in the region and globally. We know you're listening and we're excited to have you with us tonight. Thank you, Sherwin, for keeping us on the air in crystal clear liquid stereo. Thank you, Lambi, on the console again tonight at Q95, directing the traffic. Lambi will certainly direct your calls to us a little later as he continues his steadfast recovery from his health issues with a big comeback on the controls. So the people's voice is priority tonight. Lambi will take your calls. So my fellow listeners on Facebook, on YouTube, and all around the world, all around the globe, in every nook and cranny, let's get started. I will go first to Justice Dr. Irving Andre. As usual, people have been always asking for Andre. Now I'm giving you Dr. Irving Andre tonight to get our conversation going, starting with his analysis of what he sees may be happening with the events and circumstances leading up to these snap general elections and other trends in Dominica. Dr. Irving Andre, you get the first word. I'm going over to you now.
Thank you, Mr. G. And let me say good evening to my distinguished panelists, to Brother Lambi. I understand that his middle name is Lazarus. To your listeners, and to all those who dream of a better, prosperous Dominica. This is supposed to be the festive season. We're supposed to be looking forward to celebrating family and friends and good health at the Christmas season. But unfortunately, we are now engulfed in a struggle for the heart, soul, and minds of Dominicans. When this election was called, my understanding was that some of the zealots gleefully proclaimed that the opposition had been caught with their pants down. The reality, however, is that this cynical call for this election on a list which is so bloated that it could populate another country, another island, probably La Lang. The real truth is that the calling of this election exposed the naked truth regarding the lust for power, regarding the extent to which the directorate would go to impose itself on Dominica. And in so doing, it violated every norm of decency, of morality, of legality. There are some who take solace in the fact that the directorate has the discretion to call an election at any time. So from their perspective, there's no illegality. But how can calling an election based on a voters list that in itself is illegal, how can that make the election illegal? How can you call an election when the body charged with monitoring or governing or supervising elections have not done its job in terms of ensuring the basic safeguards are put in place to ensure a free and fair election? But that is what we are faced with. It exposed the naked truth of the ugly reality that now confronts Dominica. The election, or the calling of the election, ran roughshod over the CCJ and its clear direction. There are those who will try to smoothen or to gloss over what the CCJ indicated by indicating it was not directly relevant to the issues it faced. But that is not the point. The point it is unequivocally stated that we should not have an election with those types of taints. The most significant being the clear vulgarity of a voters list, where the Electoral Commission, at least those who head it, patently failed to do their statutorily defined job of cleansing that list to ensure the integrity of the election. And we have the advent of observers. We have the Commonwealth team of observers. Reports reaching me indicate that when the opposition folks met with some of these observers, including the Commonwealth team, they were reproached for not participating. But what do you expect? What do you expect? Who selected that team? The person who selected the team, was that someone who described Dominica in this most disparaging of terms, Ali Susi Sel? Is that the same individual who put that team together? One of the members of the team is a minister from Antigua. Wasn't there some controversy a few months ago about Dominica's conspiracy with the Antiguan government to send back someone called Choksi back to India? This is a member of this team who is observing. Wasn't after Hurricane Maria, wasn't the head of the Commonwealth tasked with raising funds for Dominica? Have we ever heard of what happened to those funds which were collected? So what do you expect from these observers? Will you see any reference to the fact that members of the directorate, after they voted, remained outside the polling stations taking notes as to who came and who went? Do you think you will find any reference in their conclusions about the comments made in the Kalinago territory? You cannot fool us. We are keeping eyes on you. A veiled threat to coerce persons to vote for the directorate. Do you expect that you will see any reference to some of these blatant illegalities? Do you see, or do you think you will see any reference to the flagrant violations, not violations, the flagrant spending in terms of these elections? No, but what they're concerned of is the propriety of the opposition, official opposition, I should say, contesting the elections, so that they are concerned with a certain type of negativity from their perspective. And they ignore the big rock in the road. They ignore the big crisis that is imperiling the state of Dominica's democracy. They have come to Dominica with an agenda. And they may say, oh, it was free but not fair, or fair but not free, or whatever it is. But they do not have the moral wherewithal to identify what is fundamentally wrong with what is happening in Dominica. This whole business of these observers is to legitimize and to normalize wrongdoing in all its forms and manifestations in Dominica. Nothing more, nothing less. And that is why we should not place any reliance on what they say. But even if they say that the elections were not free or fair, what do you think will come out of it? How many Caribbean leaders as opposed to opposition members, leaders of government, how many have made any comment expressing any concern about this cynical decision to call an election. Not one. Because they're all paddling the same boat. A boat loaded with items which can only be described as self-interest, which can only be described as an obsession to remain in power at any cost and not to say anything to embarrass one of their colleagues or comrades at arms. You really expect Gaston to say anything bad about the Prime Minister, Gaston? Really think so? No, because they're all in this thing together. Didn't our Prime Minister send a whole shipload of Dominica a couple of years ago to Antigua to sing, "We love you, Gaston," or Gaston, whatever his name is? I'm not sure. This is where we are today. And this is why we are facing this existential crisis. And this is why we as a nation, we have to ask ourselves, are we satisfied, and are we satisfied to accept all these things? What is the appropriate response? I know that they were independents who ran up. I'm not going to condemn them, to be quite frank with you. We have a big tent, and you must have divergent views and so on. And it could well be the case that if, in fact, anecdotally, what I heard is true, that at least 2 independent candidates won in 2 constituencies, I hope that at least that gives them the wherewithal to select senators, as opposed to these yes men and women that the political directorate was looking forward to appoint, to have a cabinet full of cries of kumbaya. We love you. What are you giving us this time so I can shout louder how much I love you? That is where we are. Some person said, oh, the opposition should have contested because at least they would have a voice in cabinet. Are you kidding me? They would have a voice in parliament. Jesus Christ. What kind of voice have they had over the last 15 to 20 years? The parliament hardly sits. When they sit and when they say something, the Speaker of the House, what an embarrassment, shouts them down with the same mantra, you are imputing improper motives. But when the members of the government lambast private citizens and others alike, there is no such chanting of improper motives. The whole thing is a big travesty. Nothing but a big travesty. And it is a shame that today in 2022, not one Eastern Caribbean leader can come out. When I say leader, I mean leader in government, can come out and express even a minimal concern about what is happening in Dominica. We all know about the timing of this election, when it was called. We all know that it happened on the very same day that Sir Dennis Byron contacted the opposition and the Prime Minister about his impending report. We know. There is a connection between that declaration or that notice and the calling of the election. So that the timing had only one purpose, to make sure that there was yet another election on a bloated list without any reform. And bear in mind, as has been pointed out over and over again, that in 2019, our same leader promised such reform in 100 days. And bear in mind further that the same leader challenged Lennox Linton to join hands and hearts with him to enact the reforms proposed by Sir Byron. So we know what's going on. We know what's going on. The Constitution is being trampled on. The CCJ is being treated like yesterday's newspaper. So Dennis Byron, quite frankly, is being treated with gross respect. I am shocked that he hasn't publicly stated his fundamental concern over this blatant betrayal, because that's exactly what it is, a betrayal. Because the mandate he received was to come up with reforms to enable us to institute these reforms to ensure free and fair election. That was his mandate. I am shocked that he has remained silent. And in moments of moral crisis, as someone called Martin Luther King has said, silence is the worst form of betrayal. And that silence, unfortunately, is now a deafening reality in Dominica. Many people know what's happening, and many people choose to maintain their silence for different reasons. To hold on to their jobs, to get a pittance, not to incur the wrath of the directorate, to see the beautiful brown paper bags drifting slowly but inexorably towards their front doors, filled with baconet and other goodies. Is that the price of nationhood? Is that the price of patriotism? Is that the price, or is that the sacrifice or lack thereof? When you see what's happening as clear as day to your country, we will pay a huge price for this. And it's reassuring when I hear anecdotally that the turnout was low, because that at least suggests that persons are taking this thing seriously, that there are patriots who understand the stakes. There are patriots who, by not participating, have said, that is my way of refusing to associate or align myself with this travesty that some call democracy. Because it is not. It's a road to hell and damnation. That's exactly where it's at. You know that same thing from this German philosophy, when they came for me, no one spoke. And that is what will echo through Dominica. Because now, or what we have in terms of this defiance, in terms of this posture, in terms of this decision to hold an election in those circumstances, it shows a total disregard for the norms of what is good and what is decent in terms of governance. When you surround yourself with a bunch of young persons with no experience, and they are going to be your ministers, they need ministers of the cloth of religion. Because quite frankly, they're not there for any good reason. They're there to feather their nests, to follow the example that has been set before by those who occupy the corridors of power. But what of those discarded ministers? Where are they? What are they saying? Why are they not saying anything? Because they've been bought hook, line, and sinker. They will not say anything because their palms have been greased. Not with engine oil, but something else. And you have this pervading silence. You had it in the last elections, when similarly a number of ministers were dumped by the wayside. But they didn't say anything, and they know why, and we all know why. We all know why, because of the green grass of home. And we know we're not talking about Zebra when we refer to the green grass of home. That is the price that some people are being paid or are demanding for their silence. And Dominica will continue to suffer. As I said, there's nothing good that will come out of this mindset that now pervades Dominica. If everyone, well, not everyone, but if many are just interested in what they can get, irrespective of who is persecuted, who is shunned, who is ostracized, If that mentality persists, then we are in deep trouble. And the only thing standing between that pit of damnation and where we are those patriots, some of them with very little means, with very little possessions of themselves, but they have the moral strength and fortitude and wealth to publicly and to assertively say, I want no part of this. They are providing the leadership to a significant degree that we lack. And I applaud them, young, old, disproportionately women. You don't even know some by their full names. You know them by their nicknames, many of them, or by their first names. They're the ones up at the front, in the front lines, saying that enough is enough. You can do what you like, but I want no part of this. They're not in any big churches knocking, looking over their air-conditioned duty-free SUV. They're not in any edifices saying, yes, sir, I love you, sir. Of course, I like you, sir. They're standing up on their morals, and they're showing an example to Dominicans. And that is why we should have hope for the future. Because sometimes in every situation of disappointment or seeming loss such as this, there are signs that a resuscitation, a resurrection of sorts is occurring. And hence we have to continue in that vein. And on that note, I take my leave. Thank you.
But before you take your leave, Dr. Andre, and before I go over to Dr. Thomson Fontaine, if he's available still with us for now, I suspect he might be doing something there as we speak. I just wanted to ask you something about the whole question of the constitutionality of this election. There's been a lot of talk about whether it is immoral or whether it's illegal. I've heard many people making so many comments about what people can do. Should you be able to just call the CCJ and ask them to intervene and all kind of things like that? Talk to us a little bit about the constitutionality of this election and whether it was just simply immoral or whether it was also illegal in some way.
I subscribe to the latter view. Yes, the Prime Minister does have the discretion to choose the timing of his decision to call an election. But that is not the end of it. You are morally charged as head of state to act in accordance with the laws of Dominica. And to tell me that you're calling an election when there is unanimity of opinion that your list is more swollen than a fish that died 10 years ago, to call an election when the body charged with ensuring the integrity of elections have not even done their jobs. I heard, for example, that at least 5, 6, or 7 independent candidates had the same symbol, which is a no-no. To call an election in those circumstances shows or reflects a blatant disregard for law and order in Dominica. So persons can say as much as they want, oh, it's immoral, but it's not illegal. I reject that totally. Because if we take that argument to its logical conclusion, then what you're telling me is that the Prime Minister can call an election at any time, irrespective of whether, in fact, the legal processes are in place for an election. It makes no sense. The Constitution doesn't sanction it. Now, I heard about there's a constitutional provision which permits any citizen to call the CCJ and say the Constitution has been violated. And I expect the CCJ to say, "Guys, so you're right, you do." I say so with the greatest of respect. It doesn't happen that way. It doesn't happen that way. And let us not give false hope to anybody. The CCJ deals with cases brought before it by litigants. And the system is based on basically each litigant or each side being given an opportunity to put forward his or her argument submissions regarding the position that they take on the issue that is before the CCJ. That's how court operates. They don't operate by taking telephone calls from citizens and saying, Gasson, you're right, you know. I agree that the Constitution has been violated. Well, I don't think so. Everybody is entitled to his or her own views. For obvious reasons, I disagree with that entirely and totally. The CCJ will only make a decision if, in fact, an issue comes before it in the proper fashion. That's how Constitution works. That's how the legal system works. And that is how it will work if, in fact, certain issues regarding, for example, the fact that $4 billion of revenues that should be in the consolidated fund is in mysterious accounts, according to someone called Zampoli, who was in the belly of the beast. And if, in fact, the CCJ has occasion again to reflect and make a decision on the propriety or legality of Dominica's elections, this is how these things will be dealt with. Quite frankly, and I'm very sure, positive in my perspective, that this, in fact, is the right way. It is only when these things are challenged that you may get redress. No other way. And I don't think that I'm saying anything that is new. I don't think I'm saying that anything that is new to Dominica or unique. That is how it is in every jurisdiction which recognizes the CCJ as it does its apex court. And that is what we have to brace ourselves for. The CCJ is not going to bring salvation to Dominica. It's the actions of Dominicans. It's an aroused Dominican population. It's a Dominican population that has been energized, mobilized, motivated. Their consciousness has been elevated to a point where they say enough is enough. I ain't want to be cooled out. I want to be encouraged. I want to be energized. I want to do something to help my country and my family and my children who will come after. Don't come with any cool out, Gasol. Go cool out yourself. That is not the remedy that I seek. There was a video, somebody in Grand Fond. Thank God Thomson is not from Grand Fond. Counting money. Capitole. 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 And some empty bottles were reposed next to him. This is what we have to reject. This is what we have to reject. Because you see, a few dollars, if a few dollars is what will induce you to sell your soul for a mess of pottage, or will sell your future, then obviously there's a much consciousness building that has to take place in Dominica. But as I said, there's hope. Young people are taking steps to make themselves heard. The ladies who are always at the forefront of struggles all over, they're being very active. All the persons within the political and non-political sphere are playing their role, and that momentum has to be carried forward, because on your shoulders rests the future of Dominica. Again, I will take my leave.
And thank you for those opening remarks, Dr. Andre. I think I'll go over to Simeon because I think Dr. Thomson Fontaine might be a little bit engaged in something. So we'll wait until he's available to come in again. Thomson, so it looks like you are there with us.
Yes, I am. I am. I am here. Actually, I was doing some quick calculations because I wanted to declare a total victory for the opposition forces tonight in this election. I counted that from the 14 constituencies so far that has been declared, including the 6 that were declared on nomination day, a total number of votes of 9,192. That's the total number of votes cast. If you extrapolate that, Mr. Gregoire, using a little bit of math, there can be no more than 15,000 votes cast in this election. You hear what I said, right? No more than 15,000. So that would be, and if I could do a further calculation of 15,000 divided by this bloated list, 15,000 divided by the list, let's say 75,000, you are talking about a 20% turnout.
Yeah, but somebody, maybe on another radio station, somebody put something there on my WhatsApp saying that the voter turnout was somewhere between 70 and 80%.
No, it cannot be. In last election, the 2019 election, the turnout was 55%. And I can tell you that based on what I have seen from the 14 declared constituencies on the official website of the Electoral Commission, only 9,192 votes cast. That would mean, if you extrapolate that over the entire 21 constituencies, no more. It will be probably less than 14,000, but certainly no more than 15,000 votes cast. 20% voter turnout, and I think that validates our case, Mr. G, for a new election with electoral reform. Because it means that what we've been saying all along, that this election is illegitimate, it is a sham election, and that it needs to be redone. And I think that message would be sent very, very clearly to the observers, to the international community, to the region, that this election has to be done over. And let me just add and say congratulations to the many supporters of the opposition parties who decided not to go to the polls, who listened to advice, and who stayed away from the polls. So I can tell you that there is very little comfort for Mr. Skerritt if only 15,000 people decided to go to vote from his voters list of 75,000 people. I think that sends a very strong message to the rest of the world that the people of Dominica are serious about electoral reform, and that is what we need in this country.
Let's look on the other side of the numbers, Dr. Fontaine. What does that really mean? If the voter turnout is so low, if also it means that the opposition supporters did not turn out, and that is why it was so low, what does it really say about the level of support that the opposition forces have in comparison to the Dominican Labour Party support? Because up this morning, after, I don't know how much it is, we have no verifying that, but we've been hearing all over the place that some $20 million was being spent on this election campaign, and we saw a lot of evidence of a lot of CO and so on, and a lot of stuff being, people getting stuff. So what does that really mean? And the Prime Minister, head of the Labour Party, today, on election day, I got a voice note really pleading with his supporters in the Labour Party to come out to vote, because he said he realized that they were not inclined to go out to vote. I'm not sure why they're not motivated by all of this money and this CO and this largesse, but it seems as if they did not turn out. But on the other side of the coin, does it really mean that the opposition forces together, this coalition that we're talking about that seems to be taking root in Dominica now, does it mean that their support is now maybe bigger than that of the incumbent Dominica Labour Party?
Well, what it tells me is clear, that this Labour Party has lost a tremendous amount of support. This is a party that, mark you, 3 years ago, I believe got some 23,000 votes or thereabouts. 21,000 votes, right? So from 21,000, and if you look at this, I'm saying probably 15,000 votes total. About 1,000 will go to the opposition forces, the independent candidates, sorry, not the opposition forces, the independent candidates, because the third party did not fare very well. So far I've seen the highest count for the votes went to Jason Fontaine with 29. The other candidates got 6 and 11 and so on. So they did not do well at all as a party. So it means that the independents did a lot better. But that would mean effectively that you have almost, from 21 to 14. That is a that is a huge drop. That is almost a 20% drop in the support of the Labour Party. So it shows two things. It shows that there is a great deal of dissension within the Labour Party. The persons resign, and now is the first chance we have, by the way, to get a good sense as to how the people on the ground would have voted. I mean, bear in mind, in all of those numbers, we have the 6 constituencies where no votes were cast. So that does not include those constituencies. Okay, what we'll probably do later on is to probably do an assessment based on the 16 constituencies that voted. We might increase that figure. I think that's probably the best way of doing it. Do an estimate for the other constituencies based on this 15. But either way you cut it, it means that the Labour Party is losing support rapidly in Dominica, and the opposition forces are gaining, because people heeded the call, and from the 40,000 that voted last year, it means that 25,000 wouldn't have taken part, and that is huge.
Well, I think that is a very key figure that we're looking at, Simeon. And I really want to go over to you, because to me, this is key. What it tells me, and what it seems to tell us, but the picture is evolving, and so we expect to see changes as we go along. But as it evolves, we will see it much more clearly, and we can rework the maps as we go along. We have more figures. But it certainly tells you that, if there was electoral reform and the campaign finance reform included in that, where no political party could have that kind of largesse to spend that kind of money, and look at the results that are coming through. What does it? And I remember there was the last election, there was a poll which indicated that the opposition seemed to have been winning in many seats. But then Dr. Andre likes to remind us about this picture on the airport where you have how many, jets lined up?
International airport overnight.
International airport overnight. Is that the reason why this poll, that the poll may not have taken that particular aspect of it into consideration, the votes coming in from outside? So if the votes didn't come from outside, let us assume it was not as significant, if any of it did, and if that's the kind of turnout we're seeing, and if that's the kind of result we're seeing, what are we to? Simeon, let me go over to you. You're a smarter fella than me.
No. Thanks for that. Good night. I think the first thing I would like to say, if all soberness or sobriety, is it seems we now have a very unpopular minority government in Dominica. It means, therefore, that what regrettably, unfortunately, has happened in the political landscape of Dominica is that we have seen the demise of a very popular political persona almost doing his swan song on a platform of being rejected by the majority of Dominicans. And whether or not the Labour Party seemingly may have triumphed tonight, I think the more articulate statement that is being made is the Dominica Labour Party and Roosevelt Skerrit are now returning to power to rule a country where the majority of the people do not want them to rule over them, and that they do not enjoy the support, the popularity of people. And not only that, he has ushered in, or he has overseen the, you could say, ruin of the Dominica Labour Party. But you see, all the incidents that have, and all the occurrences that have happened leading up to this election and even in the current election should bring to mind certain, how you call it, philosophical positions in life. It was Sophocles. I like to always draw back on my philosophical teachers were Sophocles, who said that it is rather to fail with honor than to succeed with fraud. And so what we have seen is, over the years, the Labour Party has been succeeding with fraud. Through the last elections, we know successively, elections after elections, the victory of the Labour Party has been wrought with fraud. And so what we have today is that they have the failure of this Roosevelt Skerrit and the Labour Party and the government is they have failed miserably, and their failure did not come out of honor. Okay? And to those who would say that Dr. Andre made reference to it, that when Roosevelt Skerrit called the election, he was almost being somebody of some hero. You know, there are certain platforms upon which certain people operate. And Martin Luther King said once upon a time, cowardice asks the question, is it safe? Expediency asks the question, is it polite? Vanity asks the question, is it popular? But conscience asks the question, is it right? And he went on to say, there comes a time when one must take a position that is neither safe, nor polite, nor popular. But one must take it because one's conscience tells them that it is right. And so over the years, we have seen a lot of political expediency and a lot of playing with the law. From no law, no constitution can touch me, and take it to the court. And we've had some of the most seemingly prominent Dominicans saying that it was okay, that the prime minister had the authority to call an election. I like to always remind people that it is not everything that is legal that is right. And so this election is raising certain questions, because the soul of Dominica is on trial. The soul of Dominica has been on trial, but the soul of Dominica is even more on trial now, because we have had to debate between what is legal and what is moral and what is ethical. And you asked Dr. Andre these questions tonight. So the questions that we have to ask ourselves and they must ask themselves, is what is legal always moral? Is what is legal always ethical? Okay, because one of the things we have to remember as the history of humanity has shown us is that we must never forget that everything Hitler did in Germany was legal. Everything Hitler did in Germany was legal. Apartheid was legal. Slavery was legal. The segregation system in the United States was legal. And so it's not because something is legal that it is right. It is not because something is legal that it is morally or ethically correct. And that is one question that we need to ask ourselves as we look at the results of this election tonight. On the sacrificial altar of political expediency has been the wastage of what one would say 20 years ago was a promising young man by the name of Roosevelt Skerrit. And it is very sad to see how, because of all this expediency and the abuse and misuse of power and privilege, how he has almost come down to somebody who regretfully is what I would term as a failed promise. A failed promise because as a young man, he was given the opportunity to usher into this country something that is new. And so he has fallen very short. A failed promise because when you look at having come to that position on the heels of, on the platform of people like Rosie Douglas and Pierre Charles Stewart, has become of him. And so these are the questions we have to ask ourselves tonight as we look at what has happened in Dominica today. And it is very interesting that while tonight I'm sure labor rights might be celebrating, there is nothing to celebrate. There is nothing to cry hooler about. There is nothing to there. In fact, there is not even victory. They have not even gotten over the finish line because they were not in a race. There was no one competing with them. And so they cannot claim victory. They cannot say that they have achieved a milestone because of the fact that this constant abuse of power, of the circumventing and abuse of the law for their own privilege and their own benefit has come full circle and backfired in their face. But it must tonight, one of the things that Dominicans need to ask themselves tonight is, where will Dominica be come tomorrow? What stand will Dominicans take come tomorrow? And what will Dominica be after tomorrow? I think of the Titanic. Every time I sat down today and I thought of the election, I thought of the Titanic, because Dominica is now on a sinking ship. And so as we begin to look at where we go from here, we need to seriously go back and ask ourselves, are we prepared now to choose our leaders with wisdom and forethought as we begin to think of moving forward? Because Dominica is going to need a new brand of leadership, a new characterization of leadership, a new quality of leadership. So are we going to now choose our leaders with wisdom and forethought? Because to be led by a coward is to be controlled by all that the coward fears. That's where we have been. A leadership of cowardice, whereby we have been controlled by everything that that coward feared. Do we want to be led by a fool? Because to be led by a fool is to be led by opportunists who control the fool. And that's where we have been. We have had a lot of opportunists in Dominica who have been controlling the innocence of a fool who has been in power. Do we want to be led by a thief? Because to be led by a thief is to offer up our most precious treasures to be stolen. And that's where we have been. Our most precious treasures have been stolen. We need to ask ourselves, do we want to be led by a liar? Because to be led by a liar is to ask to be told lies. And that's where we have been. And lastly, we need to ask ourselves, do we want to be led by a tyrant? Because to be led by a tyrant is to sell ourselves to those, and those we love into slavery. So that is why I say tonight, Dominica is going to need liberation. Dominica is going to need a certain new exercise of freedom as we begin to think after this sham, hypocritical exercise in a so-called election. What is going, because I have no doubt, Mr. Gregoire and Dr. Andre and Lambie and Thomson and everybody, that we're not going to have a government. Come tomorrow, we are not going to have a government. We will not have a government because we have people who have been elected under false precepts and false expectations. And we will not have a government because when I look at the slate of candidates who have, I don't know what to say, who have been put into a precarious position of leading Dominica into the next few years ahead of us. I look at these candidates, young people from St. Joseph and Portsmouth and Peerbush and these places. What are they bringing to the table? What are they bringing to the fore to bring into government to manage the administrative process of government? And they are going to join people like a failed minister of education from the Cassibruce constituency who has come back into government. They are going to be led by the most arrogant and the most failed previous ministers. So we have a bunch of young people who are coming into government to join a group of some of the most incompetent public servants that we can dare say we have ever seen in Dominica, without a doubt. And so the future of Dominica is at stake. the Latin phrase Quo Vadis Dominica is very, very, very important to be asked tonight, because we have to think of what's going to happen to our young people. What's going to happen to our health sector and the improvement in health? What's going to happen to our education sector? What's going to happen to our public service? And most particularly, what's going to happen to the economic sector of Dominica? When we see tonight that there is no doubt in my mind that the Prime Minister cannot be a happy man. He cannot be a satisfied man for two reasons. One, the seeming superfluous victory that he was hoping to celebrate tonight, he has been denied that opportunity. He has been denied that opportunity to gloat that he has 121 seats, or he had an improved mandate, or he beat the opposition forces. He has been denied that. And so he cannot be a happy man tonight. And secondly, someone who is so deflated, there's no doubt in my mind that if one possesses a certain reservoir of arrogance and tyranny, there is no way that person can confidently go and lead a government, because the motivation and the stimulus to lead has been undermined. And I can assure you that this is where we are going to see most probably the most sour and precipitous turn of leadership and prime ministership that we would have ever seen in Dominica.
Simeon, thanks a lot for that. Now, I want to welcome Bernard with us, and I have to go back to Dr. Andre in a minute, but soon we'll want to open the lines, because I know a lot of people are waiting to call. Bernard, as I go over to you, because I know that Dr. Thomson Fontaine is very busy working a lot of maths, and I know when he comes back to us, he'll be giving us a lot of statistics, a lot of figures, because I think information keeps rolling in. Some information has in fact been coming to me. As before I give that, let me just say that does this mean really that Dominican voters are by and large rejecting bribery and treating those who are here in Dominica? Because if, as we hear all these allegations of all these billions of dollars being spent, and yet people didn't even bother to turn out, are they saying, I'll take your money and I voting for you? We have the question is this because we see this decline really now in the DLP in terms of the results of the election, and we see all of it, because we see some kind of decline in the popularity. Does it really mean, and I'm going to put the question out there, does it mean, as Dr. Andre has been saying, those discarded ministers, will they now feel emboldened to maybe to break their silence and say what is really going on with the DLP that is causing it to deflate in the way it appears to be deflating? Maybe they will answer that question themselves, who knows? And we're getting some numbers that in Portsmouth, for example, out of 1688 who voted in 2019, only 217 persons voted in Portsmouth this time. What does that tell us? If these figures are correct, what does that really say to us? Portsmouth, 1688 voted in 2019, and you get 217 only voting in 2022. Now, we recall that I think so in other words, if the vote out is anything like 30% or less, like 20%, out of 15,000 or so, well, it means that 15,000 people voted out of about 81,000 registered voters.
Hi, Sheridan.
Yes.
Sorry. I just wanted to caution that there is a lot of false information on the internet in terms of the numbers.
Okay.
The actual numbers voting in Portsmouth, according to the official electoral office website, is 1,030.
Okay, excellent.
200 and something. There's a lot of false information out there, so just to caution, yeah.
Well, thank you for that, because we already know that you are looking at these numbers, and when you come back, I believe you'll give us a full-fledged thing on the numbers, updates on those numbers. So I will certainly exercise some caution in calling out numbers. But it seems to me that that has to tell us something in terms of what is going on, where the government did not really have any significant opposition, just a few independent candidates. And the Prime Minister had to come today, Bernard, and ask, plead with his supporters to go out to vote. What does that tell us? Your thoughts, Bernard?
Well, thank you, and good evening to you, Mr. G, and all my fellow panelists. And of course, to everyone listening online and here,
Bernard, let me just ask Thompson, maybe he could lower his volume on his
or maybe
device
mute.
or mute it or something so that we can, so that we don't get the feedback coming back. All right, go ahead, Bernard.
Very good. So yes, so just welcome to everyone. As you said, there is a lot of numbers and analysis that has to be done, but as a statistician kind of guy, I do like to understand the reality behind the numbers, and the numbers can be misleading, right? We need to understand what percentage of people actually voted, subtract out all the 6 seats that are not contested, look at the real patterns, get the real patterns in the data that says something. There's some knowledge there, but there's a lot of digging and analysis that would have to be done to understand that. Because we would certainly understand and expect that if, for example, lots of labor rights thought, well, we already have it in the bag, they may very well not turn out to vote. We would have to understand that, quantify that before we decide that it simply means, support is actually dropping for those candidates. It could be misleading. So we have to do a real good statistical analysis and quantify some of those variables so that we can get to the real underlying signal. But I do believe that there is, all this caveat said, that there is a signal that is there. And I think once we evaluate it properly and do the correct analysis on it, we will find that signal. I think the signal is true, that the support, at least certainly the enthusiasm for the Labour Party is fading rapidly. That is probably part of the reason why folks, they will win. Maybe I may not go out. If you were truly enthusiastic and really pumped for the Labour Party, maybe that would not have, you would have decided to go out to vote anyway. Be a team player and you're happy and excited about your candidates, and so you go out. And so, but again, we'd have to quantify that and figure out a way to make that happen. But I mean, the message is clear. I think these snap elections have driven a stake into the Labour Party, and it has hit an artery. It has probably hit the jugular, and they're bleeding like crazy now. Now it is up to us to ensure that no tourniquets are placed on that bleeding artery. We have to let the Labour Party continue to bleed out and take the cops out so that we can get on with the real work of building our country. There is certainly all indications, as we've all been saying, that the Labour Party best days are behind it, and probably its end days are very near in front of it. That pattern is clear. But we, as a united opposition, we can't blow it. We can't play into the narratives that Roosevelt Skerritt would try to play with us. He wanted and wished he could have played the narrative of destruction and hooliganism, and these here are the true enemies of democracy. So he could sort of work his way out of the moral dilemma and the morass that he finds himself in terms of illegitimacy and in terms of his blatant attempt to skirt any electoral reform and hold elections under tainted conditions. All of those, that heavy baggage of moral degradation and moral, outrage that hangs around his neck, he would have loved to have had a red herring, a distraction that this violence caused by the opposition party. So we were able to maintain that discipline and to ensure that we did not allow Roosevelt Skerritt to change the narrative from what it is. What it is we are living under an illegitimate government. The elections that Roosevelt Skerritt calls are illegitimate in the sense of they do not reflect the true will, the values, the ideas of the Dominican people. They may well have gone through an election process. There was no stuffing of ballots, but for legitimacy is not necessarily dependent on ballots. Legitimacy is a psychological condition. A legitimate government is one that's viewed by its majority of its population as being correctly constituted and be given a mandate to rule and govern our lives. And under that definition, from that point of view, from that perspective, this government is certainly illegitimate. And as I said in my speech last night, we may have sunk to an all low in terms of legitimacy in our island. So now the fight becomes, now this sham election is over and the results are in, and kind of as we expected, and with a low voter turnout, and it paints the picture. This is an illegitimate government, and then the question becomes, well, what do we do now? We must keep pressing the issue. This is an illegitimate government to the far corners of Dominica, to every organization, to every citizen, to every international regional organization, that Dominicans are living under an illegitimate government. And once and unless we have reform to ensure a level playing field, we will continue to be so. And when that electoral reform is in place, then we must marshal all the forces, all our ideas, all the opposition to brand the reality, which is this: we are under an illegitimate government, and demand that the issue be resolved for the Dominican people. And the issue can only be resolved with fresh elections conducted under a reformed electoral system. And then we will demand, we will have the moral demand that Dominica needs to be brought back into legitimacy, and that Roosevelt Skerrit would prevent that and show him preventing it and hanging on at all odds in a defeated party which now exists, but he will hang on in all odds. But we must not let that happen. We must press on. The fight does not start. In fact, it starts tonight, to make the case that we are living in the worst time of our lives under an illegitimate government, and we need fresh elections under a reformed set of reform rules, which should occur by the middle of next year. And then we ask, with all moral certitude, to restore the Dominican nation to legitimacy by having fresh elections in the next several months following that reform legislation being passed. So that's where we are. Tonight is not a night of mourning. Tonight is a night of celebration, because we know the path that we're on, and what we need now, it is clear, the light is at the end of the tunnel to replace this government.
Well, let's hear from the people then, if they share your thoughts on this, because I mean, the people, I'm sure, I mean, we have so many wonderful people who are with us on Facebook and on YouTube and so on, and lots of people who are listening online, not only in Dominica, in every nook and cranny, but all over the Caribbean and all over the globe. I know many people are listening. So Lambi, I want to go over to you so you can give the people the numbers, and let's invite the thoughts and the views of our listeners on all of what we've been saying and all what they've been hearing and witnessing in their communities on this election day, and what they think of the results that are evolving. Let's go over to you, Lambi.
Good evening. The Global View and Q. The numbers are 449-3095, 449-3096, 449-3097, 616-4257, 305-432-9624. Let me run those numbers one more time. 449-3095, 9695, 616-4257, 305-432-9624, and we already have a number of calls. So let's take this first call. Good evening, caller. Thanks for joining us. Go ahead, please.
Good evening, gentlemen. It's a very good and interesting program tonight, and I'm listening.
Good evening, and thank you for calling.
What I would really like to say is the independent candidates, especially the Salisbury and the Marigot independent candidates, if they're going into that house, stay independent. Do not ever make that mistake and merge into Skerrit team. Do not do that. Or you went in as independent, stay independent. That is my concern and my fear right about now. Stay as all you are. Independent all you went, and independent all you shall stay. I am listening. Bye-bye.
Well, I think
we appreciate it. On the Otis line, please go ahead.
Good evening, Lambi. Good evening to Mr. G, Dr. Andre, and the other guest whose names doesn't come to mind.
The other guests are Dr. Thomson Fontaine, leader of the United Workers' Party, and
Yes.
Simeon Joseph, and then, of course, Mr. Bernard Ito is leader of the Dominica Freedom Party.
Okay. Mr. Ito, Dr. Fontaine, and Mr. Joseph. Good evening. Gentlemen, I listened to your presentation, and of course, the erudite, Dr. Irving Andre. I agree with I support his presentation 100% in that he's asking the same question that I've been asking from the time I've heard about this, observers coming in. But this is my position. If we have had 4 consecutive elections, these groups have been here. They have made recommendations. None of these recommendations have been implemented. Not one. Is there consequence? No. What can they do? What is their role? What's their responsibility? Then you have the CCJ advising us that there should be no election without electoral reform. On the same week or on the same period, you receive the draft outlining the procedure and the process. You decide to call a snap election. In other words, you are thumbing your nose at the CCJ. And so my question to the observers, what are you observing? Have you been out in the field? Have you been to the Melville Hall airport to see whether planes are coming in with people? Have you listened to the speeches by the Kalinago territory people, by the ministers who said they have their gangs in Bath Estate and Grand Bay and this? Excuse me. Did you record that in 2019 election, that regional service personnel were brought in, soldiers from neighboring countries were brought in on the eve of election to intimidate the voters? Isn't that fair? The election cannot be free. Even the people that are here, my position was we should have made these observers uncomfortable because that is what they want. If they are too comfortable, well, everything is peaceful. Dominicans by nature are peaceful, happy-go-lucky people. In spite of their political rank and whatever, they still, hello, hi with their neighbors and their friends. We are not a warring people. We don't really, it's not every day we have constitutional Kulwas brigade.
Thank you very much. Thanks, appreciate that.
All right, I will stop here because the other person would like to make their contribution.
Yes, you can always call back again. I know we have a lot of calls waiting now.
We have another call on the line. Caller, please go ahead.
Yeah, good evening, Lambi.
Good evening.
It's good hearing your voice after a while.
Nice hearing yours also.
Yes, and I would like to say good evening to Dr. Thomson Fontaine and the leader of the Freedom Party, Karen by him clearly.
Bernard Ito.
Yes, and to Mr. Simeon Joseph.
Right.
Mr. Simeon Joseph, you and I share the same sentiments as to whether the Prime Minister got the report from the CCJ at the same time or whatever. I believe there was they were in tandem thinking about doing the same thing, or they had something together, because I cannot believe the same day he brought in this report, the same day he had the election calls, and as you said, those things, those platforms, or probably whatever they did in the placards and so, it takes a while to print, So I don't believe in Mr. Dennis Byron. I just believe we had a problem with that factor and so on. So I believe what happened there today with the election really shows that there is a problem with Dominica and people who believe in Roosevelt spirit. Good evening, gentlemen.
Good evening, and thanks a lot.
On the overseas line, please go make your call.
Hello. Hi, good evening.
Good evening.
Yeah, okay. I just wanted to pose a question to the two political leaders present. Now, the question is, if you're forming an opposition coalition, what would be your policy or what would be your stance to collaborate with the TUD, that's Alex Party, and the independents who participated in that election. Because if the policy was to boycott the election because of irregularities and no electoral reform, I don't see why would the opposition parties want to have any collision interference with the independents, and in particular, the Team Unity Dominica Party, who's I think to be very damn dishonest. Have a great day.
And thanks a lot for that. We'll certainly give the leaders of the two parties an opportunity later on to try to answer your question. But Dr. Andre, I wanted to go back to you quickly before we take any more calls and before the two leaders would answer that question. I know Dr. Thomson Fontaine is very busy pulling out numbers and preparing to give us an update on his thoughts on all of the statistics that we're looking at tonight. But you know, the question that was raised, where will Dominica be tomorrow? And what stand will Dominicans take tomorrow? Now, what I'm hearing, some people are saying that the Prime Minister, somebody promised nowadays, a white paper is going to be circulated, a white paper on electoral reform. We heard from the Prime Minister a little earlier today or the day before or something, a couple of days ago, that you know, now that we 5 more years, we're going to go into electoral reform, and that we will have an election in maybe in 27 or something like that, in 2027 with electoral reform. We're hearing about a white paper. Now, we're hearing those things against the background that we know that Sir Dennis Byron had presented a draft document a few months before that final letter came out to the leader of the opposition, which was published. We know that the government people had access to that. And so when the caller asked the question of how it is that the Prime Minister knew what to expect, maybe in the first draft that was circulated, maybe he expected, based on what was in there, he may have expected and decided, you know something, better I start preparing for an election before this thing can be implemented, before it comes to light. Maybe, I don't know, I'm just speculating on that. But the fact of the matter is, we do know that the Prime Minister went ahead and called an election as soon as it came to light that Sir Dennis Byron was making his recommendations for some real reforms. He actually was saying, let's do the same thing that the Electoral Commission was proposing to do. Was it in 2014 when somebody sent an email and said, look, these fellas doing madness down there. They want to put voter ID cards. They want to do all kind of things. It seems to me that this is what Sir Dennis Byron seemed to have been saying, let's go back and do those things. And so somebody in their wisdom decided, boy, this guy might have been right in that email in 2014. If I allow that thing to go free, it's going to change my winning legacy. And so let me do something quick. So this election came and we've seen the results, and the opposition did not participate, and we saw a lavish amount of money being spent. We still see voter turnout not high. We still see that the government's, the Labour Party's position is more or less the same in 19 or 18. What is it you can do with 19 that you could not do with 18? So what was the point of it all? And then today we're hearing about a white paper, the same day. Remember, on the night of the election in 2019, we were told within 100 days, you'll have electoral reform, and I'm going to put this legal luminary there to give us record and tell the opposition leader, as you said earlier, Dr. Andrew, you reminded us, the opposition leader must sign an agreement with me. As soon as we get these recommendations, we're going to Parliament right away. But look what happened. We had an election today before that happened. And now the same night of that election, I'm hearing talk about a white paper on electoral reform. Well, what happened to the recommendations that said, you know, you can have all of the recommendations and you can go to Parliament with them, and by March, April next year, all of this will be in place, and then you can have an election. I'm not sure why a white paper is being considered when it doesn't seem there's any willingness to wait for the rest of the recommendations from Sir Byron. Your thoughts, Dr. Andre?
Any suggestion of any white people or any colored people, to be quite frank with you, is just further evidence of the capricious nature of the decision to call an election before electoral reform. It's another cynical ploy. It's a cynical move to basically pacify those who agitate for free and fair elections in Dominica. It is nothing but just the latest strategy in, as I said, manipulating the electorate to believe that any meaningful change is happening in Dominica. When all we have, it's not a white paper that we will be getting. It's a crocus bag with a devil in it. Or diabasak, the people would say normally. And let me echo this, because it harkens back to something Simeon says. This election may well signal that London Bridge, or should I say, the Chinese bridge, is falling down, so to speak. But let me remind you of something. A narcissistic personality reacts very viciously and violently when cornered, or with the advent of waning popularity. That typically is when they're most dangerous. So this is not something that should place us in some euphoric kingdom where we take solace, or where we bask in the joy and the celebration of this moral victory. On the very contrary, I know that many of your lawyers, your callers, like to quote scripture. Simeon himself is an expert in that. But they will tell you that we fight what? Not flesh and blood. Our fight is against principalities, kingdom, despots, rulers of the darkness, according to the Bible. And these battles are not won overnight. These are battles of attrition. These are battles of people united by a common cause, united by a vision of what is good, united by a decision, a collective decision, a unanimous decision to change the path or the course of that ship, which is headed towards a giant iceberg. So that this is what Dominicans should reflect on now. The battle has to be joined. The struggles for survival has to be joined. The war against iniquity has to be prosecuted with all the moral fiber of all the patriots who can come at the table of brotherhood. So this is where, regardless of how it is framed, but this is where we have to be going of necessity. And that is the thing, because we understand that once that cancer is entrenched, one surgery will not get rid of it, garçon. You know, bagay you what they call it again? Chemotherapy or radiation over many weeks and any months. And we have to use that analogy, that this is a fight that has to continue. The other islands are laughing at us. Gaso Saki Fayo, go St. Lucian, that's what they'll tell you. Saki Fayo, we changed our government last year, boot out what, 16 of them or whatever it is. That's what we did. Because it's our right. We have a right to do so. We are not going to be cowed into submission by any tin pot dictator. St. Kitts tell you the same thing. They protected their airport. And we are at a good position now, a good space. Because one of the good things about what has happened is that the regional and the international world has been sensitized to a degree that they had not been sensitized prior to this cynical decision to call this election. This election which was so blatantly wrong. Questions are now being asked. The various prime ministers and leaders may choose to stay silent, a conspiratorial silence, but other persons are asking questions. What is wrong? What is happening in Dominica? How can they do that in Dominica? These are the questions being asked. Not only were there observers in Dominica, as you know, but there were a few reporters from other countries such as St. Lucia or Barbados. And these were not reporters who were trying to whitewash or sanction some white people on electoral reform, as that fella in Barbados called Wickham, that snake oil salesman. These are persons who are here because they're genuinely concerned about what's happening, because you know what? They know that if one part of the Caribbean is suffering, there's a chance that other parts will suffer as well, because there are Dominicans all over, and there are Dominicans being affected. And it's not all Dominicans who will come here for a ticket and run away, callously leaving their fellows, their cousins in some instances, their brothers, uncles and aunts, struggling while they go back to the United States to get their government-issued cool-out money, while those who dare express one word of righteous indignation, they get nothing. So yes, the London Bridge will fall down, but it will not fall down on account of gravity. It will fall down on account of the collective efforts of persons to right the ship of state, to give hope where there's none, to give courage where there's not enough, and to give strength to the persons who are looking for a helping hand. And that is why I think Mr. Ito said something to that effect. No, we have to batten down the ship to prosecute that fight for justice, fair elections, and for the rule of law.
And on that count, Dr. Andre, I'm going to go over to Simeon Joseph. But Simeon, as I go over to you, two things. There was a video that was in circulation. I saw it. Somebody sent it to me. I don't think it's a fake one. Who knows? Anything can be fake these days. But I saw the Prime Minister crying on a campaign platform. And he had a towel and wiping his tears away. And he was lamenting the fact that this will be his last campaign as a candidate. And he was saying he will soon go and he'll be doing other things and whatnot. But then somebody just corrected me a moment ago when I said about this white paper on election reform. They said, no, he's not speaking about a white paper on election reform. He spoke about a white paper on the Constitution. Now, there is some old talk going on. We don't know it's an allegation, but there is some old talk that the Prime Minister may wish to get out of the politics and become an executive president. Now, when we hear the talk about going away and getting off the campaign trail and not offering self-election again, now we're hearing about, on the night of the election, we're hearing about a white paper on the Constitution. Is that an indication there's a move to amend the Constitution to create an executive president? We're just asking. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, but you probably heard the rumor just as I did, and I will come back afterwards. Go back to Dr. Andre again. Let's comment on that, because we know some work was done. Some people said Dr. Liverpool may have done something at some point on something, and then we know that Dr. Telford Georges had done something with a team on constitutional reform under the UWP. So, Simeon, let me go over to you and give me your thoughts among other things that you wanted to add to what I'm saying tonight.
Well, you see, how do I put it? I think it was John F. Kennedy who said that without debate and without criticism, no administration and no country can succeed, and no republic can survive. Now, why am I saying that? You talk about executive presidency. Now, what has history shown us? When you look at all the executive presidents who have existed in Africa, Asia, Latin America, South America, what has become to the republics that they have served? What has become of the republics that they have served? We can list as many of them as possible. Pinochet in Chile, if we had to go to South America, Duarte in El Salvador, if we had to go there, and the number of them in Africa. So the question we have to ask ourselves is, whether there's a white paper or green paper or yellow paper, as the case may be, what are the implications for Dominica having an executive presidency? I mean, let's face it. Let's face it. If Roosevelt Skerritt wants now to be the executive president of Dominica, what a precarious position are we going to be in? Because he's just a prime minister. And a prime minister is supposed to be the first among equals in a cabinet. Now, can you imagine what's going to happen if the posture, the position, the approach of governance that he has now, when he's supposed to be running the ship of state as a collective? Can you imagine what Dominica will be like when he's an executive president, when he has to appoint ministers? Because that's what executive presidents do. You elect a president and then they appoint their prime ministers and their ministers. Case in point in Russia, Vladimir Putin was the president of Russia. He stepped aside and then what's his name became prime minister, okay, president, and then he came back as president, and then the former president became prime minister. And so he's basically manipulating and controlling every aspect of what happens in Russia. Let us not forget the presidents of Haiti. You hardly have a prime minister of Haiti. All the executive presidents of Haiti have been dictators. Even currently, where Haiti is now a pariah state. You go to Zimbabwe, you go to Kenya, you go to Nigeria, where all of these places have executive presidents, and look at the type of governments that they have run. So I think this thing should, send to us a signal, and a signal that is a very strong warning. Can Dominica afford that style of government? Are we prepared for that style of government in Dominica? Because let's face it, when you have this kind of executive presidents who wield large power, they control the security forces, they control the state, they control all the engines and systems of government. Now, Dominica being such a small country than it is, can you imagine the level of suffering, of subjugation, of subordination that we're going to suffer? The prime minister now is just the prime minister, but Dominicans are living in fear and trepidation, although he does not have executive power. There are teachers who are afraid to speak. There are policemen, customs officers, public servants, lawyers, judges, bankers, businessmen who are so afraid of this man as a prime minister. Can you imagine how much more fear and trepidation will prevail if he becomes an executive president in Dominica? That's all I want to say.
Simeon, let me go over to Lambi. Lambi, you want to take a call before I go to? All right, so you can interrupt us anytime, Lambi. We want to take the people's calls. Dr. Fontaine, are you ready to give us a little bit more contribution on what you're doing, or you want me to hold on still before you come in?
Yes, sure. I can certainly add to the conversation. I've been taking a closer look at the figures, and it is quite interesting. Quite interesting. I now have practically all of the results for the 15 constituencies that took part, and from these 16 constituencies, at least these are the preliminary results. Okay, it could change by a few here and there, but from these 16 constituencies, 16,720 persons have voted in this election. 16,720, and in the last election in 2019, from these same 16 constituencies, we had a total of 31,688 votes. So effectively, that shows a reduction of almost 52%, in the number of persons who vote. Actually, 47%, sorry, 47% reduction in the number of persons who voted in those 15 constituencies. So what I did was to what we call extrapolate, was to use those 15 constituencies and apply those results to all of the 21 constituencies. Now, a very simple way of doing that is to look at what percent of the total those 15 constituencies constitute. So in the last election, we had a total of 40,077 persons who voted. The 31,688 is 79% of that, 79%. Okay, so from these 15 constituencies, they formed 79% of the constituencies that voted in the last election. So applying this ratio, I can say now that if the same patterns were followed, that a total of 21,146 persons would have voted in all of the 21 constituencies. And what that effectively means is that we have a voter turnout of some 28%. 28% voter turnout. So that is what the numbers are telling me. And what this effectively shows is that is a stinging rebuke for the Dominican Labour Party. It is clear that the Dominican public sent a very clear message. It's also a tremendous victory for the opposition, because the people of Dominica listened to the advice of the opposition and decided that they were going to make a stance for electoral reform. And I mean, the message could not be clearer. I cannot imagine now coming out of this that we do not get reform within the next year or so. I think the message to the Prime Minister of Dominica is that the people of Dominica have spoken. This is like tonight is like a referendum on electoral reform. That is how I interpret those results. A referendum on electoral reform. And the people of Dominica have spoken unequivocally in a very loud voice, shouting from the mountaintops that they need electoral reform. And that has shown even the Labourites who did not go out to vote today indicated that that is what they wanted. I mean, think about it. We are talking about over 19,000 persons who did not vote in this election and who voted last year. And we know, if you look at the patterns of election voting in Dominica, every year it increases. Okay, the numbers increases because you have new registrants and so on. Okay, so it would even have been higher this year. But if you just go using 2019 as the benchmark or as the basis to compare, then you're talking about over 19,000 persons who abstained from voting. And that to me is hugely significant. It's hugely significant, and the message is very clear as to what direction the people of Dominica wants to go. Now, I wanted also to respond, since I have the few minutes, to respond to a question that was asked about the coalition. Now, bear in mind, we are not at this point. We are not.
We're getting a little feedback coming too. I'm not sure from where it's coming from.
Okay.
I'm not sure where it's coming from. It's interfering with your audio, you know?
All right. If everybody's muted, I don't know if it will still continue.
Go ahead anyway.
Is it still, okay, I'll try to be quick there. Yeah, I wanted to respond to the question that was posed earlier with regards to what we would do in terms of a coalition. Now, bear in mind, the coalition that has been formed, the Electoral Reform Coalition, we have formed specifically to agree on electoral reform. Okay, that's the extent of our coalition at this point. We have not moved beyond that. So we are not talking about joining forces with TOD or UWP, with the Freedom Party and other parties in other areas. Our focus as a coalition is restricted for the time being to the issue of electoral reform. What happens beyond that is something that we'll discuss later on. But it's not a question of rejecting TOD or accepting them, or rejecting the Freedom Party or accepting it, no. I believe now is a good time for each of the parties to independently work on their base, improve their support, and in terms of a discussion about a unity, if you're going as a coalition into government, that will take place much later, closer to when we have elections, the next round of elections.
I wanted to, before I let you go, and Simeon, let me just talk a little bit more to Dr. Thomson Fontaine. And I wanted to hear from Bernard as well, because as he has to answer the question about what the leaders are thinking of. And I wanted to get his reaction because to all his numbers that Dr. Thomson Fontaine is also giving us from a Freedom Party perspective as well. But Dr. Fontaine, it is clear that you indicated that the results tonight, the turnout and so on, is like a referendum on the performance of the Dominican Labour Party. You've indicated that that turnout is so low. It is indicating clearly that people are no longer going to be swayed by the treating and bribery. They're making a point to say, you give me the money, I'll take it, but I'm still not going to do what you tell me right now. I'm fed up. Now, if we're hearing about this talk about a white paper, whatever color paper, to create maybe, because there's speculation that there's interest in creating an executive presidency. I wonder whether a referendum on that notion of having an executive president Dominica would turn out to be something similar on what we get in this referendum on this election without electoral reform. And I'm thinking, if the Labour Party might think, well, now we have 19 seats, although we had 18, we could have done it, but now we've done a new thing, we have a new thing, we want to start on a new dispensation. Let's consider amending the constitution so we can create an executive president. I'm just wondering what it is that Dominicans would have to say about that, whether they would be required, there has to be a referendum before any consideration can be given to that. And in that referendum, how would people vote? It seems to me that whatever you do, you have to have some reforms in the system to ensure that whatever voting that you do is going to come out of a free and fair result. Before you, I wanted to get your reaction to that, because there is, in fact, this discussion, this speculation taking place about the possibility of somebody coming up with the idea of an executive presidency. And Simeon Joseph gave us a number of examples where this has failed miserably in many countries, including our neighboring right there in Haiti. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm not sure who is pushing this. To me, that is not a common sentiment. I don't hear that being expressed by the vast majority of Dominicans. What the vast majority of Dominicans are asking for is electoral reform. I don't hear people talking about changing the system that we now have. And if we're going to do this, it is only fair that the people of Dominica have a say. And any major change to our constitution should go through a referendum. I would not recommend that any major change to the constitution simply go for parliament. It has to be that in a major change to like something like that, the people would need to decide on it. Okay, so and like I said, I'm not seeing any great demand by any segment of the population. People appear to be happy with this. The changes I would like to see, though, in this whole constitutional makeup or constituency makeup in Dominica is in terms of the number of constituencies. I think we need to rebalance and probably reduce the number of constituencies. I don't think Dominica is well served with 21 constituencies. These are the kinds of issues I would like us to look at more closely and take a harder look at, because I think, it is very unbalanced in terms of the numbers. We need to have a more equal representative system where we break up the country in equal slots, so to speak, and have persons go up for representation. But of course, all of these can be discussed. But the idea of having an executive or moving to that where you have, like we have in Guyana or Haiti, is something that would call for a lot more discussion. And certainly, if the people of Dominica decide on it, then it has to be through a referendum.
Well, thank you, Dr. Fontaine. I wanted to very quickly go over to Bernard for a very quick, response to the caller had made its comments about asking the leaders what are their thoughts on this, and give me your thoughts as well on the statistics. Your statistics person, your numbers person as well. Your thoughts on some of those, Bernard, before we go to.
Yeah. So right now the Labour Party is blasting music on the road next to my home, so it's a little noisy, but. I don't disappoint this thing, but let them do the thing. As far as the numbers, I think the numbers represent what we've said. It shows clearly that the voter turnout is very low. It shows that the enthusiasm, at least for Labour Party, is not there like it used to be. The other question we have to ask ourselves is, what percentage of that normal voter numbers are imported voters? That's an analysis that we need to do. If the numbers are so low, could it possibly be that all along local voting turnout was quite low and the imported voters was boosting those numbers significantly? So these are ongoing analysis that will have to be done. I think it shows that clearly the Labour Party is on the ropes, and we have an opportunity as opposition parties to take them to the mat. I think we really can, with a good message pressing our advantage that we have now in terms of the illegitimacy of the government, the weakness of Roosevelt Sheridan and his kindergarten, cabinet, we have an opportunity to position ourselves as the better leaders, the stronger leaders, the more capable leaders, and demonstrate that to the Dominican public. I think if we do that well, we will win the next election, because electoral reform or not, we still have a lot of work to do to win over the Dominican people to our side of the argument. We should never take it for granted that electoral reform settles the matter. It does not. So that's sort of the view on it right now. But I'll go on mute because this music is getting outrageous. So let's
Right.
just go.
Okay, thanks a lot for that, Bernard. Simeon, I know you have a lot to say, and I really want to give you some time. But before it slips my mind, I want to get Dr. Andre's input on this thing, because we're still on this whole question of the possibility of the reform of the Constitution to create this notion of an executive president. I know we've had discussions on this program, and Dr. Andre, about some amendments that could be made to the Constitution, and as Thomson was saying, the method of selecting the winners and so on, how you apportion the victory. The winners don't take all. And so talk to us a little bit about this and this notion that is going around. And because of this talk of a white paper in the Constitution, somehow it gives me an uncanny feeling that this thing is somebody's taking this thing seriously and thinking, hey, we just go, let's do something and let's get some reforms going and create this thing. Your thoughts, Dr. Andre?
Let us maintain a grip on reality. Let's go back a few years when we switched from the Privy Council to the CCJ. I believe the Constitution had provided that there should be a referendum. I don't know, as I speak to you now, that was the only method of changing our final court of appeal, but certainly other countries, if my memory serves me right, St. Vincent had gone down the way of referendum, and in fact, and I'm pretty sure it's St. Vincent, the Vincentians had, and I stand to be corrected, turned down that proposal. But it would be wrong for us to assume that to have an executive president, the political directorate will hold a referendum. It ain't going to happen. Because if the justification for going towards that goal, having an executive president, you ask yourself why, what honest reason could motivate such a thought? The two reasons on the table, quite frankly, is one, total power, and two, immunization, insulation, isolation, prevention of being prosecuted for any wrongdoing in office. That is no mystery. Why do you think a few years ago the head of the Integrity Commission was shown the door? Why do you think that after that famous dictum from a lawyer, for God's sakes, about reform destroying your legacy, why do you think that cronies were planted into the Electoral Commission? Why do you think all the sinews, all those institutions that should be a check on the body politic have been contaminated? It is in furtherance of absolute power. So let's don't fool ourselves. There'll be no referendum, Gasso, about an executive president, because that would be the logical culmination of everything that has happened in Dominica. That is the road the directorate is walking on. There is no big stone in that road. The only big stone is the collective will of patriots who will stand up for the country. So there'll be, irrespective of what the Constitution says, I predict tonight there will be no referendum, Gasso, because that is just an unnecessary hurdle. And that is why we have to take so seriously what's happening in Dominica now. There is no hesitation. There is no subtlety about what is happening. There's no effort to even hide what is happening. It's in your face. If you can basically throw mud in the faces of all major institutions of governance and rule of law, whether it's the CCJ, whether it's the Sir Byron, whether it's the Electoral Commission, if you can show a blatant disregard for all these institutions, local, regional, or whatever it is, what makes you think that that's why you're going to have a referendum to decide whether we should have an executive? It's not going to happen.
Yep.
It's not going to happen.
Yeah, but let me just say this briefly, though. I have a little bit of a contrarian view on this with the rest of the panel, I guess. Personally, I don't believe Roosevelt Skerritt was sick to be an executive president. I see absolutely no advantage to Roosevelt Skerritt to being an executive president, especially if it involves being an executive president and then you strip away, the legislature from that process, and then you have an independent legislative process to elect independent legislatures, and then an independent executive president. I see absolutely no benefit to that to him. He's much more powerful as a prime minister. A prime minister has much more powers than an executive president. So I don't see any advantage, honestly, to him doing that. I mean, there are contrary opinions, but
I think the terminology is ceremonial versus executive.
Right.
No, I'm talking about executive like the United States of America.
No.
The United States of America has an executive president who does not come to Congress.
With significant checks and balances.
Yeah, but
Brother Ito is forgetting one thing.
Right.
Brother Ito is forgetting one thing. A bet noir called immunity from prosecution.
Well, that's one point. But as far as power, I don't see an advantage to it. I don't think you're doing. I mean,
when we look, yeah, but that is true. That may be correct. But you see, again, and Dr. Andre raised an important point. It has to do with checks and balances. If we have an executive president like those in the United States, where the president of the United States can be almost subpoenaed and impeached by the Congress.
By Congress, yeah.
That's fine. But there have been countries in the world where executive presidents go on with impunity, very dictatorially, surpassing and bypassing every system to which they are accountable. And that is how it is. I mean, look at Putin, look at North Korea, look at China, look at all the countries in Africa where executive presidents have abused, misused, and overused their power in spite of the fact that there are systems in place. Now, when it comes to the presidency, I think, if my memory serves me right about our constitution, in those matters, our constitution gives us alternatives, either referendum or 2/3 of the House. Okay? And I think when we went to the CCJ, they opted for the 2/3. Same thing for any change in the constitution, they can go for 2/3. And I think Dr. Andre alluded to it. You see, one of the things we are missing in the psychological framework and approach of Roosevelt Skerritt is that he is an incremental manipulator. Okay? He knows his goal. He knows what he wants. He will not do it directly, but he will do it incrementally. When you look at what has happened over the past 20 years and the shift of how this country is governed, the shift on the security of the state, the shift in the management of the country, he didn't just start, and not only that, he was able to manipulate the minds of people, divert their attention from what he has been doing, while he has incrementally gotten his way in doing almost everything he wants to do. I mean, we have to me, I think we have to hold this thing in balance and perspective. And that question is a question that may be true, because while some people are saying they do not see it as part of the debate in Dominica, there is no doubt that within the circles of the government and the Labour Party, there are plans afoot, no doubt, to ensure that he becomes an executive president. Now, the thing of when we are in discussions with, by and large, people who circulate themselves around Roosevelt Skerritt and how they speak, as a former public servant, to see how there are many people in the public service who literally granted Roosevelt Skerrit full authority over everything in the appointment of permanent secretaries, which has to be through the process of cabinet and to the president, in the process of the appointment of statutory boards and organizations, when those things have to go through the proper procedures of the Public Service Commission, in the signing of contracts, in the awarding of bids and all those things. You have people in cabinet who have basically sat silently and acquiesced to every move for total control. And so there are people who have literally said, when they say the PM will, and there are people who should know better, who actually tell you PM say. And so we have in effect an executive president already in place in the nomenclature of a prime minister. There's no doubt about it. And so we need to be mindful of that. I would how you call it, agree to the fact that we have to be in our how we call it, in our expectations, but I wouldn't put it beyond. I certainly wouldn't put it beyond, because as I said, this man is an incremental manipulator, and we've seen how he has used systems of state, system of governments to wield his power. When you look at the fact, I mean, let's look at it on the, what do you call it, the Wednesday, the 3rd of November, an independence address was given. At the end of the independence address, the statement was made that we have to work towards electoral reform. 3 days after, an address to the nation in the midst of a storm where an election was called, and half of the members of cabinet didn't know an election was being called. Think about it. Some of them didn't even know that they would no longer be ministers. Some of them found out while they were out of state, while they were at their homes. Some of them were not even tuned into the speech, and they were told that the House of, as I understood from one particular family of a certain minister of government, they were told that the House of Assembly was dissolved. I mean, what? Action speaks louder than words. And there is no doubt the enablers, I think the question is, will Dominicans stand up for it? And that is the important question. The important question that has to be asked. And that is where, Mr. Gregoire, just bear with me 2 minutes. I listened to Mr. Ito and Dr. Fontaine, and I sort of lend an ear to the notions of unity, unification, and unifying. So I'll take that from two perspectives. Yes, we need to continue to fight for electoral reform, and perhaps that should be the order of the day. But the question that has to be asked is, for Dominica's sake, for the future of the country, whether we should not revisit those words. When do we need to unite? What kind of unification can we have? And how can we unify ourselves for the betterment of Dominica? And we need to distinguish between those things, because unity does not always mean unification, or unification doesn't necessarily mean that people are unified. I think we have to become unified in our ideas, in our approaches, and in our expectations to ensure that whatever we do is for the well-being of Dominica. And whereas perhaps they may not want to, and I'm neutral here, I'm an outsider, I'm not in any the bowels of the organization of any of those political parties. But if perhaps they do not want to publicly disclose their intentions, I would like to say publicly that I think it is time that the opposition forces of Dominica Freedom and United Workers' Party, and whichever party, come together and say, you know, for the sake of Dominica, okay, let us form one united force. Let us be united in purpose. Okay, let us have that unification approach where we can unify what we do, because Dominica needs to be saved one way or the other. And even if it means, I'm going to be very, how you call it, radical, dissolving the Dominica Freedom Party and the United Workers' Party and coming up with a new political organization for the sake of Dominica, I say let's do it. Because Dominica needs to be saved. And we cannot be guarded or be too tepid in our public approach to say, let's come together to save Dominica. It has to happen sooner or later. We cannot afford for that kind of thing to happen. They may not agree with me, but that is my position on the matter right now. I'm sure they may not agree. Now, lastly, there's a Dr. Fontaine's mic is on. The thing about governance, I think we need to re-examine, if we are to go forward, the structure of governance and representation in Dominica. Dr. Thomson alluded to that. 21 constituencies is much too many. Not only that, the boundaries of those constituencies, to my mind, sometimes are confusing. Just look at Roseau South, Roseau North, Roseau Central, and Roseau Valley. How they configure it in all different types of directions, okay? And Cochrane and those kind of things. They just look at the makeup of those constituencies. You know, I remember when the UWP was in power, I proposed to them that we have 10 constituencies because we have 10 parishes. Like Barbados would have St. George's. We have 10 parishes in Dominica, okay? And perhaps the constituencies should be demarcated by those 10. But I think what we need to do is a very radical step where we can come up with our own system of representation and government, unlike anywhere else, but akin perhaps to what exists in Switzerland, where we use our strong local government system to give rise and birth to proper representation. So within the 10 constituencies, we will have local village councils, and from the local village councils, we will have representatives who will compete for 2 representatives, for instance, to the General Assembly, okay? And maybe from that, we will sort of devolve power back into the hands of people, okay? And there are many, I think what we need to do is, I remember being part of the Constitution Review Commission in 1998, part of the panel in the North. And that is one of the things I propose, that we have to re-examine our system of representation. 1, because of our topography. 2, because of our geography. 3, because of our population. I mean, it's ridiculous to have some constituencies where you have, 600 people, Thomson, as in the case of 1,000 in terms of run for your constituency, and other places where you have 20,000 people, as in the case of Roseau or Goodwill, and you call that a constituency. I think we need to look at it again. For example, Roseau could be called St. George's North and St. George's South and St. George's East, and finish with that. That would take care of all the Roseau areas. You understand what I mean? And then we have St. Andrews. So you could have St. Andrews North and St. Andrews South, and you have St. David's North and St. David's South. So we need to look at that. But what I think we need to do is to revitalize the local government system, revitalize the local government representative system, and perhaps from that, we can give rise to what you call district representation, national representation, and thereby having a greater empowerment of people. So we can do something new, and I think that's what we have to look forward to. It cannot be just a question of removing this government in power and replacing it with the same, because for some reason or other we have inherited, or we have been bestowed with a system of government and representation that has been given to us by the British, without ourselves coming up with our own germane forms of representation on the behalf of our people, which would make it more effective, which would make it more representative, and which would make it more accountable as well. Because what we need is not just representation, we need accountability, which is lacking in governance in Dominica. The Prime Minister himself has said it. You elect people and they do nothing with you after. And Dominicans have suffered for lack of representations for centuries, for years. And I think we need to get around the table. So 2 things I'd like to propose that Dr. Thomson and Mr. Ito, we need to really sit down and decide, listen, let's just come together. Let's just decide to form an army and fight that battle, and know that, and if it means therefore that we have to have everybody in government, let's do it, and let's not be timid or tepid about our efforts to come together. I think I've listened to Mr. Ito. I think he would make a formidable Prime Minister, and equal to Dr. Fontaine, or work out an accommodation where 2 of you decide, well, okay, you have a power sharing arrangement. You are 2 bright men, 2 experienced men with all of that. And I think let's not be timid about coming together, because you are two great men with a lot of resource and experience that can lead this country forward and ensure that we come out of the morass. That Dominicans are looking for that kind of hope and that kind of steady hand of leadership that we need. So that's just my humble recommendation.
You've said a mouthful there, obviously. A very big mouthful you've said there. It's a lot of food for thought, a lot for consideration. I want to go over to Dr. Thomson Fontaine. I don't know if he feels in a position to answer all of the questions you've put there tonight, but certainly two things struck me here. And these are things that we have discussed on this program before, and Dr. Andre has played a central role in this when we looked at reform of our constitution and the kind of government that we need to have, the kind of system. And we certainly discussed the question of decentralization, decentralizing the power, put more power in the hands of the local government so that the people can take greater part in the decision making in charting their own future in their communities, in their districts, and in their neighborhoods. And of course, trying to remove some of that power from the prime, all of the power, too much power is in the hands of a prime minister. A prime minister in Dominica now is more powerful than the president of the United States. I mean, Joe Biden has his White House and he can take decisions here, but I mean, he has to wait for what happens in the Senate and that happens in the House of Representatives. He can't just do things. He has veto power, yes, but he does not have absolute power. And so there are two things to consider. I'll go to Dr. Thomson Fontaine first. I mean, one of them, obviously, Simeon is raising the question of the unity versus unification and, and how to unite and so on. And the question of the system of governance that we should have, where we give a lot of more influence to local communities and let people take part in their own self-actualization at the community level. Dr. Fontaine, your thoughts on some of all of that, but I think the key thing is saying, fellas, get together and let's create one force to build Dominica.
Yes, indeed, and one of the things that I spoke to when I first assumed the role of political leader of this party was the fact that I would welcome all ideas and consider every idea that I think is worth looking at, and the idea of unification is a good one in principle. It really is, and how we can merge our efforts. However, Simeon will agree that I can't here and tonight declare this. I am a responsible leader of a party. I would need to engage with my party on any talks of unification, certainly. What I can say, however, is that we are laying a very good foundation, the way we are working together on this issue of electoral reform. It certainly paves the way for further collaboration, and it's something that we have to keep looking at, and I'm sure the party at some point will be looking at the question of unification. And in fact, this has always been an issue that we've considered. I mean, the idea of Team Dominica came about out of this broader concept that we move beyond United Workers' Party to a Team Dominica concept that encompasses the various oppositions. So obviously that is something that we certainly could keep talking about and discussing with a view to getting to a point where everybody is happy with. But certainly I cannot decide that tonight here and there on this program. With regards to the sharing of power, I think that's an excellent idea, and the idea of putting more power in the hands of the village council is an excellent one. And one of the issues that I have is the system that we adopted from the British, this Westminster system, is certainly not the best. It has not served us very well, and I think we are 44 years old. We should move out of our parents' home by now, and we should be looking critically at our constitution, looking at areas where it can be strengthened, and looking at giving, as you said, giving more power. We cannot have a situation as we have now in Dominica, where one individual is all powerful, putting terror and fear in the hearts of every citizen. I mean, that is simply unacceptable. So we really have to look at a situation where you can have this, you can outsource, if you like, the outsourcing of power, put more power, have the local authorities, the village councils take the decision on where the school should be built, on who the teachers, the hiring of the teachers and so on, so that they feel a greater stake in their communities. And in that way, I think you'll have a lot more. The more ownership you have, is the more persons will want to contribute and sacrifice for the communities. And I think that's a very good way of getting a lot more involvement, getting persons. You'd have a lot of more persons vying for village councils, persons who can offer the services rather than just, so you'll have, for example, the probably a school teacher or fireman and so on, others like that with some standing in the society would want to then do this. So that is something that is very important. But the issue of constitutional reform, I think the last major effort we had was many years ago with Cozy Harris and the other distinguished luminaries, Cozy Harris and Telford Georges and so on, men of just gigantic, tremendous stature, who reviewed our constitution. I think now is a good time, to do it, and that is one of the undertaking, I believe, as a United Workers' Party government or a unity government, we will certainly look at in terms of a revision of the constitution and see how we can strengthen it and make it work better for us and our certain circumstances and situation in Dominica. And let me just say, I have done one more piece of calculation on my figures. I get crazy when I see figures, so just bear with me a little bit. So it would mean that the Labour Party, because I'm looking at the ratio of votes that they got from the 18,300 votes, and again I stress these are the initial results, these are not the final results, but from the 18,320 votes reported so far in all of the 15 constituencies, the Labour Party got 15,064. So that means they would have gotten approximately, if you apportion that to all of the 21 constituencies, would have probably gotten around 17,388 votes, which would be a serious climb down from the 25,000 or so votes that they received in the last election of 2019. So that is something that I think that is worth noting, and I think makes the case that we made very well tonight, and the figures don't lie. All right, the figures tell the truth that the Labour Party is under serious threat, and the people of Dominica finally, I believe, are tired of the Labour Party and are looking for a different direction.
And thanks a lot for that, and Dr. Fontaine. We're not disappointed. I mean, certainly we knew you were going to come back with some figures. And I know that as the days go by, I mean, this is not the final time we're going to be talking figures. I know as the days go by, when all of the final figures come in, you will update those figures, and we'll have again, a more constructive discussion or where real things are going, because somebody asked a question, where do we go from here? What are the Dominicans they're going to do? What standard they're going to take going forward from here? But Bernard, I want to go over to you. I mean, you know, Thomson Fontaine, we put his neck on the block a while ago and asked him to answer the questions of Simeon. We're going to ask you to see what you can do. We know that you'll probably have a diplomatic line in your statement saying, well, you know, you can't take any decisions for on behalf of, you'll have to go back to your party. But certainly we could get a glimpse of what you may be thinking about the whole question of unification, what your thoughts might be on that. Over to you, Bernard.
Sure. So since you put my disclaimer out there, I won't repeat it.
Okay.
So we're good. But I think, I mean, the reality is, I think we're nationalists, you know. People like myself, people like Dr. Fontaine, a lot of people in the opposition movement, Simeon himself. I mean, we're nationalists. We're really concerned about developing our country for the sake of developing our country, right? To leave a legacy, to do something useful with one's life, to make a better, more useful country, to make our parents and their cousins happier, to do what we can with our skills and capability to make a better place for all of us to live. I mean, I genuinely believe that almost everyone I meet on the side of the opposition, the individuals involved, we're nationalists. We're concerned about national development. So with that said, I mean, the intent is to do what we need to do to get the right people in the right seats, get the bus moving in the right direction so that we can get on with the job. I think the job is delayed 20-something years. We believe we can do it. We believe we can transform this country in 20 years. and that is the priority. So whatever it takes. If I do believe myself that a unified approach, that when we come together, we select the best people we can find, whichever area or position or parties they come from for the next general elections, and we should seriously consider in selecting the 21 best candidates that we can and run that. Now, how that runs with arrangements and strategies and, you know, is it rebranded, not rebranded? All those will be worked out. But I think conceptually, I think we aligned that we should get the best people to run, and the best people not just to run, we need to get the best people into this next government, because we have a lot of work to do, a lot of repairs to do, and we need the best minds, we need the best energy, we need the most ethical people that are truly in it for what matters for this country. So in concept, absolutely, we should do what we need to do to win the next elections. And if that involves a major rebranding of the parties, well, then all of that is on the table. As far as the question of what was the second part of it? I think we had some questions about some changes to some of the electoral process, and some
constitution
and so forth. I support that. I really agree with Thomson. And again, we also have to have a bit of Pan-Africanism within us, right? We have to be self-determined people, right? People of African descent. We have to believe that we can innovate, create our own systems of government that works for our circumstances. We don't have to always kneel and bow beyond what we inherited from our colonial masters. We are bright enough, we're capable enough, we're certainly innovative enough, and we're creative enough to come up with systems of government that are better. There are certainly many flaws in the Westminster system of government, especially in a micro-state like Dominica. It does not work very well. We simply import it wholesale and set it down without really doing the engineering work we need to do to find a system of government that we can engineer to work for our particular circumstances. We also have to consider immigration, right? We are a global nation, really. We are a distributed nation. Dominica does not end at our borders. It extends around the world. We have to reimagine what Dominica is. The nation, right? The nation does not necessarily have to correspond to your territorial borders. Your nation is a like-minded individuals who have Dominica in their minds, in their hearts, in their soul. That is the nation. That's what a nation is. It's an imagined community. And so the nation, in my mind, of Dominica is a global nation, a network nation. And so we have to rethink that. How do we govern such a nation? How do we organize such a nation? How do we pool our resources together to develop HQ, our headquarters here in the Caribbean, but still utilize all the talent, skills, resources that we have dispersed globally? And how do we govern this thing? So it takes a new breed of leaders, a new breed of innovative leaders, a new breed of innovative thinking Dominicans at all levels, not just at the highest level, but all through society in all different sectors, to reimagine our nation and to govern and lead our nation differently, because leaders are needed in many, many spheres. And what we need to do is inspire those leaders to do their best work with a one collaborative vision of where we want to go and make that happen. So yes, absolutely. I'm very open. I think it's necessary to reform the way we govern ourselves through our constitution and many other mechanisms that we use to govern ourselves.
Well, certainly I agree with that, and thank you very much for this very candid response here, Bernard. And Dr. Andre, you know, we've had many discussions on this program on the whole question of our constitution and how we should really arrange a system to govern ourselves. We've looked at that, and you've come up with some ideas. I just to remind ourselves that was in the 1990s under the United Workers' Party, I think that Telford Georges and his team were engaged to look at the reform of the constitutions. Many, many years ago, this was something that was being considered. There was a felt need. And the prime minister at that time, who was Edison James, he did not think too much about ensuring that all the powers remained in the hands of the prime minister. He was wide open to looking at whatever it is that came out of the recommendations from the Georges Commission. So, Dr. Andre, I wanted you to address that for us a little bit, maybe just go back and refresh our minds. That's some of your thoughts of what can happen, because clearly we're saying two things are happening here. Remember, we already swung the discussion away to this constitution because we have a strong suspicion that there is some thought being given to amending the constitution in order to create an executive president. And we're saying that this is basically something that Dominica does not need based on the examples that we see around us. But I think if we have to amend our constitution, we should take the opportunity on the eve of our 45th anniversary of independence next year. We should take the opportunity to make a fresh start and maybe look again at our constitution, because, you know, when the framers first did this thing, they never ever anticipated the rogues, vagabonds, despots, and it would become prime minister. They never, so they always, you know, you take the high road and figure everybody who's going to prime will be a gentleman, and they'll just leave it within the ambits of the constitution and even what it does not say, but we could do the honorable thing. It has not always worked out that way. So I wanted to get your thoughts, Dr. Andre, because we're coming very shortly that we're going to wind down. And on the whole question of our constitution, how can we go forward as we're looking at this now? You need to unmute, huh?
The major shortcoming of the constitution insofar as election is concerned is that it sanctions the ugly reality that the winner takes all. The winner is the first past the post, 50% plus one. And the winner gets to form the government. The winner basically chooses its ministers and so on. And the seeds of contamination rests in the Constitution. Because if the Constitution, at least it has been written in that fashion, animated by a philosophy which you alluded to, that it's honorable people who will seek to lead their country, who will present themselves as leaders of their country. And yes, the Constitution does have some checks and balances. Much has been said that the Constitution does make a provision for an ombudsman, and that one has never been appointed. I recall distinctly years ago that
the Constitution refers to it, I think, as what, the Parliamentary Commission or something like
that. But it's basically an ombudsman.
Same thing.
And Brian Arlene lamented years ago that he regretted that when he was the Attorney General, he never saw the need to appoint one. But again, bear in mind that that office is just one office designed to oversee the governance of the country. But where you have a leader who is hell-bent on subverting every institution of governance, which is essentially a check on absolute rule, then even if there was an ombudsman, how far would that get us in terms of good governance? What Telford Georges proposed, in addition to a number of reforms, is a form of proportional representation. That seats are basically meted out in terms of the proportion of votes which each party receives. Because in the past, we've had the anomalous situation where, for example, a party might win 15,000 votes, another one might win 16 or 17, and the one who wins the 17,000 gets to form, subject to number of seats, wins, for example, a disproportionate number of seats, and then forms a government. And the insidious part of that is exactly what we face today. So proportional representation is a form of selecting a government where at least you have all stakeholders who participated have the potential of playing a role in the governance of the country and not just as an opposition party. So that would remove much of the tribalism, the victimization, the unequal sharing of benefits of the state, and quite frankly, the persecution of persons who have the audacity to stand up for their rights. But again, to be fair, the James administration left office in 2000, and we would never know how far those reforms would have been instituted. But the commitments to reform will only exist if there is an overarching belief that you are there to serve. And I'm not talking about some cynical statement about I'm your servant and you're the boss and you're not even giving people handouts that the World Health Organization has given you to give to your own people. This is not what I'm talking about. Governance or persons who are there to serve the people that they represent, to cater to their needs, to ensure that no one suffers, to ensure that no one is victimized, to ensure that no one has a tarpaulin over his house 5 years after the hurricane and you live in a 64,000 a month palace or mansion or Tower of Babel, is a biblical allusion. That is the whole underlying of overarching premise of that type of government. You are there to cater to the needs of all your people, and political divisions will not be an impediment to ensure that all benefit from the exercise of state authority, because all pay taxes, because all, quite frankly, face the same type of tribulations. And when some persons are affected adversely by landslides and so on and so forth, we have an obligation to help them, not cynically calling an action to feather our own political nest. And that is what is contemplated by reforming the Constitution, to ensure that our leaders work for us as opposed to against us, to ensure that our leaders are our partners, as opposed to, quite frankly, having a whip and flogging us politically and economically. The whole ultimate goal is to ensure good governance. If there was good governance, we wouldn't even be talking about those types of issues. Because, quite frankly, if every leader was animated by that philosophy that I am there to serve, it's my privilege to be able to serve the Dominican people, to serve them well. Because the test or the strength of the chain or the test of the community has to be measured by its weakest link. Those who have nothing, those who have no advocates on their behalf, those whose poverty defines their lives. If the test of leadership is to take care of the least, the most vulnerable, as opposed to catering to those who have, those who can manipulate the institutions of governance, those who get $208,000 tax-free duty concessions within 1 year after the Labour Party came into power. The Zampolis who can get $30 million in terms of commissions. Those who can live in $64,000 a month mansions. And those who, quite frankly, have 2 or 3 jobs, while others, and in many instances more qualified than them, have nothing, because they are painted with a scarlet letter on their foreheads. That is the very antithesis of good governance. And constitutional reform is to get rid of all that. But if there's no universal commitment to constitutional reform as an end result, or as a means of getting good governance, then quite frankly, it's only the Dominican people who can make sure it happens. Because the people you're screwing, some of them are your cousins, some of them are your relatives, your uncles, your aunts. These are the persons that you are messing up with. And I think a book, and I can't remember the name of the book, but it says, you shall reap what you sow.
And thanks a lot for that, Dr. Andre. I get a feeling that this is an issue, a matter that we will be discussing again on the Global View on Q, because I suspect that this is something which is going to be in the air. And that we're going to have to reason to discuss the whole question of the possibility of reform of the Constitution. So we need to keep that in mind. Bernard, we're really coming to a point now where we have to start winding down. I mean, time is not on our side. And so I wanted to ask you to, maybe you can take a moment and just sort of give us your closing remarks.
Well, I think we're on the path, man. We're on the path to getting into a new government in place. All of this is coming together very rapidly. Roosevelt Sheridan made a monumental error by calling these snap elections, because at the very least, he has forced and driven and accelerated the discussions of a unity movement, the discussion of the parties coming together and all the social forces coming together with a very, very, very determined voice to remove this government. So he's done us a favor and to help accelerate the opposition movement towards solidarity and strategic thinking and strategic planning and execution. So we're on the path. This low voter turnout validates what we said, that this is an illegitimate government. It does not represent the will, the values, and the positions and the ideas of the Dominican people. The case has been made. The die has been cast. It is now cast. It is in the books. This is now the most illegitimate government we have ever lived under. And that is the case that we have to keep making to the Dominican people. That is the case we have to keep making, as I said, across the four corners of Dominica, because it is a fact. The legitimacy of a government depends on the will of the people being represented by the government. And this is where we are today. So the fight has now begun. The fight has now begun to restore legitimacy to Dominica. He has now cast the illegitimate mantle, and now we must fight to restore legitimacy to our island. There are two steps to do this. One, we must get electoral reforms, must be passed within the next 6 months. To not do so would be Roosevelt's carry to risk social unrest of a magnitude maybe never seen before. We need absolutely all the moral forces and the legal forces are on the side of we need electoral reform within 6 months. Once that occurs, we have to say to the Dominican people, they believe in what we're doing, that we need to restore legitimacy to our island. We've been calling elections shortly after those electoral reforms have been put in place. To not do so is to continue to support an illegitimate government ruling our lives, and we should convince the majority of Dominicans that we simply cannot allow that to happen here for the next 5 years.
Thanks a lot for that, Bernard. Appreciate that. Simeon, I wanted to go over to you to give us your closing remarks, because and there's so much more that we always have a lot more to say. Look, there's so much more to be said about this little country of ours. You know, it's only around 20 miles long by about, 15 miles wide? Only about 75,000 people. But there's so many issues, so many things we need to do. Simeon, your closing remarks? Yeah, you're muted.
My closing remarks is one I think that I've basically said tonight already, and that is what happens to Dominica come tomorrow. Clearly, I would surmise that both Roosevelt Skerrit and the Dominica Labour Party are now into their twilight years, I would say, of oblivion, so to speak. And they are reaping the harvest of efforts and machinations that clearly have destroyed a dream and created many missed opportunities. So they have themselves to blame for where they are at this moment in time. I think the Labour Party is certainly on its way out in its decaying years, because the missed opportunity to rebuild the party in 2000 cannot be regained. Too much has been compromised, too much has been undermined, and too much has been traded off. But the main concern now is Dominica. Where do we go from here? What happens to Dominica from tomorrow onwards? I'm very concerned, as I said, to the slate of candidates I have seen elected into government tonight, or quote unquote elected. I don't think it was an election, but selected to govern the country. I don't know if it's for the next 3 or 4 or 5 years. I don't see them having the capacity or the capability to turn this country around or to give us any kind of solid governance and administration that we need at this stage. What bothers me further is the fact that Dominica has reached a juncture where we compromise everything that is legal, everything that is ethical, and everything that is moral. And I think that is where the battle for the soul of Dominica has to begin. We have a lot of rebuilding to do in terms of giving us that platform and that foundation whereby we stand on solid ground. So I want to end from you could say, an echo of a warning to those who would want to perpetuate wrongdoing in Dominica and to trade off what is good for what is bad. Okay? It's from Isaiah chapter 5, verse 20. And it reads, "Woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who substitute darkness for light and light for darkness, who substitute bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter."
Well spoken, like a man of, well, I don't want to say almost a man of the cloth, so to speak. Thank you, Simeon. Thank you so much. And also thank you so much, Bernard, leader of the Dominican Freedom Party. I want to go over now to Dr. Thomson Fontaine. I'm pretty sure in his closing remarks, Thomson, any additional information or statistics or numbers you might have conjured up, you might want to share with us as you make your closing remarks. And of course, looking forward down the road, where do we go from here?
Yes, indeed. One of the things that really struck me was the near complete, how complete the boycott was by the opposition. I mean, it is phenomenal, and I really must compliment the people of Dominica who listened and who made that decision. I also wanted to compliment our three former representatives, Honorable Hector John, Honorable Danny Luge, and Honorable Lennox Linton, because they effectively sacrificed what were really very sure seats in the best interest of the country. And that is something that I want to thank them. That is a very selfless service. And I'm really proud that they're part of our team, very proud of that. And I cannot emphasize the kind of sacrifice that is, especially in a country like ours, where there are so many limited opportunities, yet they were prepared to give up, very safe seats, some of them very close to getting their pensions and all of that. They were prepared to sacrifice that in the best interest of the country. And I really wanted to make that public and to really thank them publicly for that service and that sacrifice. But at the end of the day, the people of Dominica circled them, supported them, and we have the results that we have today. And I was just reading social media that is a buzz of the news that the Prime Minister indicated tonight that he was interested in meeting with the candidates. And there is a quote that somebody sent to me that I can read. I'm just saying it, of course, now. It says, "And of course, I will meet with the leader of the United Workers' Party to discuss with him some of his views where the country is concerned."
It's on DNO.
It's on DNO, yes. Yes, apparently, yeah, on a DNO newspaper. So, in a way, I think that's a great start, because it shows in a way that the Prime Minister, I believe, got the message that the people of Dominica are sending, and his willingness to meet with the opposition, to meet with me, to meet with the candidates, I think is a good one. And it's something that can only help the country, because I am all for dialogue. I am all for discussion. The issues around electoral reform certainly would be one of the major issues of discussion. How we can get this electoral reform done quickly and in a manner that all of us will be proud of. It's not so much about individuals, but it's about a country. It's about Dominica, and I would hope, and one of the things I would like to talk to the Prime Minister about is his legacy. He's already indicated that he's on his way out. What is his legacy going to be? And it would be good if he can leave us with a solid electoral reform that gives us a democracy that we can be proud of. So it's all good. I think today will go down in the history, in the annals of Dominica history, as a great day for the patriots of this country, for the selfless individuals who continue to offer themselves amidst a very difficult situation. For me personally, I would like to see a toning down of I'm going to use a big term there, of the vitriol. What that really means, this constant back and forth, this constant almost méprising or méprising, when people give each other mépris tearing down and so on. I would like to see that toned down. And all of those energies that we spend, trying to tear others down, I would like to see those energies go into building up each other and working together to build Dominica. We are a small country. We know each other. We should embrace each other. We should love each other. And we really should contribute towards the building of our society. And if we can put our heads together, if we can put our minds, irrespective of where we belong in a political divide, if we can come around some common efforts, if we can agree on the economy, if we can agree on the jobs, if we can agree on non-discrimination against persons from the other parties, if we can agree on a society that is built on merit and not so much on whom you vote for. Those are the kinds of things that I would like to see and to discuss. So it's a very hopeful day. I believe we should not keep bow our heads down. I believe it's a very hopeful day for Dominica. Hopefully, we really get a real reset in this country as we move forward. And I'm delighted to, as I said, to see the way today went. I just want to give all the kudos, all the praises to the people of Dominica for standing up and standing firm and sending a very strong message today.
And thanks to our Dr. Thomson Fontaine and leader of the United Workers' Party. And I have to hope that you can keep yourself certain in case we in Canada want to call on you to discuss further the results that we've seen and to analyze them further as you get more results and more numbers yourself and Bernard as well. So let's get back and take a look at the real significance of that is.
Mr. G, if I could only make one final thing in terms of the numbers. I mean, this is not insignificant, I'm looking at those numbers and it almost gives me goosebumps. You're talking about if all of the constituencies were to vote, about 21,000 votes, when 40,000 persons voted in the last election. 40,000 down to 21,000. This is hugely significant for our country. And I can't express enough my thanks to the people of Dominica.
And yes, and Dr. Fontaine, what you said a moment ago about the whole question of electoral reform, it's a good thing. And you said to the Prime Minister, you should do this to establish a legacy because you leave something that is good for the people of Dominica. You might have added something to that, because if he did the correct electoral reforms in the manner in which it has to be done, he will likely lose the election which would follow that. Because remember, it was not me, it wasn't Dr. Andre who said that. It was his own personal attorney who said that these guys are trying to affect your winning legacy. If you go ahead and give voter ID cards and clean lists and change things, you will lose. Basically, that is what his attorney was. So if he knows that and he goes ahead and does the right thing, he would really have a good legacy in the sense that people would say, hey, he knew he was going to lose, but he did it anyway for the good of the country. But my English is not as good as that of Dr. Andre. So I'm going to ask him maybe we can to expand on that for us as he gives us his final remarks.
Well, let me start by thanking and complimenting the fellow panelists for the wonderful presentation that they've made. And I think the Dominican people and your listeners are the wiser for those comments and observations and so on. And I think the future of Dominica is in good hands if our leaders are speaking about cooperation, unity, unification for the good of the country, because that is basically the antidote we need to deal with this malaise which has overtaken Dominica like a blanket and which is wreaking so much havoc. Let me sound the caution to our leaders that a lion doesn't change his spots overnight. And let me sound the caution that if you've been drunk with the wine of absolute power, you don't develop a distaste for it the very next day. It is something that has to be worked on. It is something that has to be fought for. Vigilance is the best armor to protect your democracy. And that is what we have to recall at every stage of the game. Bear in mind, a few years ago, overtures were made to Lennox Linton. In fact, Lennox Linton at one point was spoken of in rather glowing terms in the parliament. But that was just a short-term development. Soon after, we were hearing speeches about take him away. Just take him away. Throw hot water on them. Because again, if you get too close to the center of power, that is the reception that is awaiting you. So keep your guard up. Don't be seduced by sugary words without any meanings. Dominica is too important a prize to be allowed to be whittled away, to be battered away, to be sold like Cicero parrots to the highest bidder. The fact of the matter is, we have to embark on a systematic campaign of raising the consciousness of Dominicans. We have to use what happened this evening as a stepping stone, as a podium, to preach to the converted and to convert others, to make others believe that they cannot sacrifice their future on the altar of short-term handouts. You remember years ago what was said about this poor Portsmouth laborite, single mother? We don't want to deal with them kind of women, dear. That was what was said by an acolyte who was receiving $500,000 in grants from the government, and he hasn't repaid a cent. They have to understand that their future, they should not sacrifice their future. Whether in terms of the loss of Ross, and not one of them would utter a word. Probably they utter a word at my Boise rum shop in Portsmouth, but I don't know. I can't speak. I don't know. I haven't been there. So let us look towards the future with confidence that we have what it takes to make a difference, to change this sorry state of things. This is not something that has been ordained. This is not something, quite frankly, we cannot change. We have the power to change it. And let us hope that our leaders have the strength to marshal and channel the collective force of all the patriots, not only in Dominica, but elsewhere, to bring meaningful change to this sceptred isle that we call Dominica. But I am optimistic, based on our panelists this evening, based on those who heeded the call not to partake in this bogus abomination of a voting process, and those in the diaspora who's contributed morally and financially to the cause of liberation. There is hope, there is hope, and there is hope. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Andre. There's very little I can add to that in closing, except to say that clearly the people of Dominica are supporting the notion of a coalition. You can see that there's a lot of support for the electoral reform coalition. People are galvanizing the support around it. People are contributing financially to it. And people are seeing it getting better and better organized, and they are responding to it. And the results of this election tonight clearly shows some of the work. It reflects some of the work of this electoral reform coalition. And I expect that the work of that electoral reform coalition is just beginning. I think I heard Bernard say that clearly. I think I heard Thomson say that clearly. I think what I heard both of them saying really is that they're looking to increase the participation, a big tent, allowing everybody to come under that tent to create one force to improve Dominica going forward. So, gentlemen, I thank you so much for your contributions here tonight. I thank particularly people on Facebook who stayed with us throughout the night. Many of them were there with us. Really want to reach out to them and acknowledge them and extend our love and appreciation to them. And those of you who are on YouTube as well, and those of you who are listening to us from wherever you are at Q95, wherever you are in Dominica, in the Caribbean, or globally. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. I think we had a very uplifting conversation tonight. I thank you, Dr. Andre, tremendously. I thank Dr. Thomson Fontaine, leader of the UWP, and I wish you great luck, Thomson. I listened to your speech last night. You were terrific. I listened to Bernard as well. Bernard is, this is a young man that's coming up. I always associate him with the new frontier, the knowledge industries. I think Bernard represents the future. Thomson really, Bernard looked like a great team very positive individuals. When I listen to them, it is so uplifting to hear what they have to say. It's so different. It's so futuristic. I think it's so appealing, I believe, to the youth, because that is where the youth are thinking. That is where they're going. So I want to thank both of you, and I want to thank you, Simeon. Everybody says Simeon is one of the most popular. People have started saying Senator Simeon. I don't know where they get that from, but they're beginning to say that. I believe Simeon would make a great contribution to any Senate anywhere in the Caribbean. So Simeon, thank you so much as well. Lambi, thank you so much being on the console. We didn't get a chance to take all the calls you wanted to take. Sorry about that. Thank you, Sherwin, for keeping us on the air. And everybody, just a good night to you. And until next time, we hope to have another interesting program next Tuesday. We will continue to discuss the results and the impact of the coalition on the results of this election, and what it is that Dominic go from here. What do we do from here? What do the Dominicans do? What stand do they take going forward to improve the country? So I think this is where our discussion is going to be next time we meet. It's going to be futuristic. Where do we go from here? So gentlemen, I want to say good night to everybody. Thank you for being here. I mean, it was really nice, and I appreciated the company. I'm pretty sure our listeners did as well. So good night, Simeon and Irving and Bernard and Thomson and Lambi and Sherwin. Take care, everybody.
Thank you. Good night to everybody. Thank you.
All right.
Wonderful.
Take care.
All right. Take care.
Bye for now.
Oh, na 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 na. Oh, na 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 na. Oh, na 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 na. Oh. Looking out my window, and I'm a thinking of tomorrow, and I'm a wondering what the future will be. Thinking of the children who are the victims of oppression, beaten down by wars and eaten up by starvation. I'm saying, when this ugly will be over, and the children can go out and play. I wanna see when all oppression will be done, and the people